He had already lost once. And when a king loses, really loses, he doesn't just lose ground. He loses everything that makes him a king. At Issus, 2 years earlier, Darius III, King of kings, Lord of all lands, ruler of the greatest empire on earth, had fled the battlefield. Left behind his chariot, his weapons, his royal seal, and his family. His mother, his wife, his daughters. All of them taken by a Macedonian boy who was barely old enough to rule. Every night since that day, Darius knew that the women of his blood, the women he was born to protect, were sleeping under the roof of his enemy. There is something that burns hotter than ambition, hotter than pride. It is shame. So he rebuilt. He called in armies from the farthest edges of his empire, Bactria, India, Scythia. He commissioned 200 scythed chariots, wheels fitted with razor blades designed to shred cavalry and infantry alike. He leveled the ground himself, his engineers working through the night, flattening every rock and ridge so that nothing could interrupt the charge of his superior numbers. He chose this battlefield. He prepared this battlefield. He was going to end this. He was going to get his family back. But before we get to the battle, there is something you need to know. Something that happened after Gaugamela that Darius never lived to find out. Something far more painful than losing an empire. We will get to it at the end. To understand what happened on October 1st, 331 BCE, you have to understand what Darius had already tried before the battle even began. He had written letters. Not one, not two. Letter after letter after letter, sent across the desert to Alexander's camp. Offering gold, offering territory, offering half the Persian Empire if Alexander would simply stop marching. But underneath every diplomatic word was something more desperate. He was asking for his family back, his wife Statera, his mother Sisygambis, a woman of iron, the matriarch of the most powerful dynasty on earth, now living as a captive in a foreign camp. His daughters, young girls who had grown up in palaces, now entirely dependent on the mercy of a Macedonian king. Alexander's general, Parmenion, reportedly read one of Darius's offers and said, "I would accept if I were Alexander." Alexander replied, "So would I, if I were Parmenion." He wasn't stopping. He wasn't returning anyone. For Darius, this was no longer about empire. It was about whether he was still a man capable of protecting the people who depended on him. He had assembled the largest army Persia had ever fielded. Ancient sources, admittedly prone to exaggeration, speak of 1,000,000 men. Modern historians put the figure closer to 200,000, possibly more, against Alexander's 47,000. He had the scythed chariots. He had war elephants sent from India. He had 15 armored war wagons. And, most critically, he had terrain. Open, flat, endless terrain. No rivers to funnel his cavalry. No mountains to compress his flanks. At Issus, Alexander had used the geography against him. Here, there was no geography. Darius had removed every excuse, every variable, every possible reason for failure. This time, there would be no flukes. When Alexander's scouts returned to camp on the night of September 30th, their report was sobering. The Persian line stretched so far across the plain that from horseback, riders couldn't see where it ended. His general, Parmenion, the same one who'd been too cautious at Issus, came to Alexander that night. He suggested a night attack. Hit them in the dark. Chaos, confusion. It might neutralize the numbers. Alexander refused. "I will not steal a victory," he reportedly said. He would win in the open, in the daylight, where the whole world could see what happened. Some historians call this arrogance. They're wrong. It was calculation. Alexander understood something about Darius that Darius did not fully understand about himself. The Persian king was not a warrior. He was an administrator. He commanded by symbol, by presence, by the weight of his imperial throne sitting at the center of his line. His army didn't fight for him the way the Macedonians fought for Alexander. They fought because of him, because the King of Kings commanded it, which meant if you could make the King of Kings run, the army would collapse with him. Not because the soldiers were cowards, but because their entire system of authority would simply cease to function. So Alexander didn't need to destroy 200,000 men. He needed to reach one. October 1st, 331 BCE. The Macedonian army moved out in full battle formation. Phalanx battalions in the center, 12,000 men, sarissas levelled, a wall of iron and ash wood. Heavy companion cavalry on the right, led by Alexander himself. Infantry and light troops bent back on both flanks, forming wings. A formation designed not to surround the enemy, but to resist being surrounded. Alexander had engineered a moving box. Across the plain, Darius watched them come. He had one immediate problem. Alexander wasn't walking toward the center of the Persian line. He was drifting right. Every step, every measured march, the Macedonian formation edged further to the right, toward the edge of the carefully prepared ground, toward terrain that favored neither side. Alexander was pulling Darius's left flank with him, stretching the Persian line, trying to walk off the prepared battlefield entirely. Darius had no choice. He ordered his left-wing cavalry, the elite Bactrians and Scythians, commanded by Bessus, to ride out and pin Alexander's flank before he could escape the prepared ground. And that was when Alexander's gamble began. The Bactrian cavalry smashed into the Macedonian right flank. The fighting was ferocious. The Macedonians bent but didn't break. The refused flank held, just barely. The dust rose in choking clouds across the entire battlefield. Horses screaming, men shouting in a dozen languages. Then Darius released the scythed chariots. 200 of them. The ground thundered. This was what they'd been built for, this exact moment, this exact charge down a flat, open plain into a packed enemy formation. The chariots hit nothing. Alexander had prepared his men. The infantry opened lanes, literally stepped aside, creating gaps in the formation, and let the chariots pass through. As they did, Macedonian javelin throwers cut down the horses from the sides. Grooms at the rear grabbed the reins of those that survived. In 30 seconds, Darius's secret weapon had been neutralized. But here is where Gaugamela becomes something else entirely. The fighting on the flanks had done exactly what Alexander intended. Darius's best cavalry, Bessus on the left, the Mesopotamian and Median horse on the right, had been pulled into brutal flank engagements. The Persian centre had shifted and stretched to fill the gaps, and in that stretching, a gap appeared. Not a large gap, not something a lesser general would have spotted. A seam in the Persian line between the left-wing cavalry and the centre infantry. A moment measured in seconds where the formation had been pulled just far enough apart that there was a corridor, narrow and fleeting, leading directly toward the Persian royal position. Alexander saw it. He turned the companion cavalry. Every one of the finest horsemen in the ancient world, and he charged, not at the flank, not at the soft edges of the Persian line, but directly into the gap, driving like a spear toward the throne of Darius himself. It was a wedge, a hammer aimed at a single point. The infantry phalanx behind him surged forward to exploit the opening, shields overlapping, sarissas lowering. The companions hit the Persian centre like a thunderbolt. Ancient sources say Alexander came close enough that javelins thrown at him struck his charioteer, close enough that Darius could see the Macedonian wedge tearing through the formations around him. And for the second time in 2 years, Darius ran. He turned his chariot, then abandoned it entirely, leaping onto a horse. And he rode east, away from the battle, away from his army, away from the empire his ancestors had built over 2 centuries, away from any chance of getting his family back. He had done it at Issus. His men had told themselves it was a tactical withdrawal. There was no story to tell this time. When a Persian soldier looked toward the royal standard and saw it gone, saw the throne cart abandoned, saw the dust rising eastward where the King of Kings was fleeing, the battle didn't end. It evaporated. Not everywhere at once. On the Macedonian left, Parmenian's forces were in serious trouble. The Persian right-wing cavalry had broken through and was threatening the Macedonian rear. Parmenians sent an urgent message to Alexander. He needed help immediately. Alexander turned his companions away from the pursuit of Darius. What followed was one of the most brutal cavalry engagements of the ancient world. Alexander drove back into the battle on the opposite flank, colliding with the Persian horsemen who had broken through. The fighting was hand to hand. The Macedonians took serious casualties. But the Persian right had also just received news. Their king was gone. The resistance crumbled. Bessus's Bactrians on the Persian left were still fighting, until they too heard the news and broke northeast in pursuit of Darius. The vast Persian centre disintegrated. Men dropped weapons and ran in every direction. By nightfall, the greatest army the Persian Empire had ever assembled was gone. Not destroyed, dissolved, scattered across the Mesopotamian plain like smoke in wind. Within weeks, Babylon opened its gates. No siege, no battle. The city that had stood for 1,000 years simply surrendered. The governor rode out to meet Alexander with gifts and flowers. Then Susa, the imperial treasury, a fortune so vast it took 20,000 mules and 5,000 camels to carry it away. Then Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the empire, the city where Persian kings were crowned. Alexander walked into the palace of Xerxes, the man who had burned Athens a century and a half before, and took his throne. Darius fled east, desperately trying to rebuild. He never got the chance. Within a year, he was murdered by his own satrap, Bessus, who then declared himself the new King of Kings. He lasted 2 years before Alexander tracked him down. Darius died in a ditch on a dusty road, abandoned, betrayed, never knowing what had happened to his family. And that is the part of this story that history rarely tells. Remember those letters, the ones Darius kept sending, the ones begging, beneath all the royal language, for his family back. He never got them back. His wife, Statera, died while still in Alexander's care. The exact cause is unknown. Ancient sources whisper of illness, some of childbirth. She never saw Darius again. His daughters were raised in Alexander's court, educated, treated with honor. One of them, also named Statera, Alexander eventually married himself, making the daughter of his greatest enemy his own queen. But the most devastating detail of all is this. Darius's mother, Sisygambis, the matriarch, the woman Darius had fought 2 battles to reclaim. She had been captured at Issus and brought into Alexander's world. And somewhere in those years of captivity, she stopped wanting to leave. Alexander treated her not as a prisoner, but as a grandmother. He visited her, consulted her, showed her a respect that, by all accounts, her own son's court had never quite matched. When Alexander died in 323 BCE, years after Darius, years after Gaugamela, Sisygambis received the news and made a decision. She refused to eat. She turned her face to the wall and starved herself to death, choosing to follow Alexander into death rather than live in a world without him. Darius's mother mourned his killer more than she mourned him. That is what Gaugamela truly cost Darius. Not his empire, not his throne, not his life. His family chose the man who took everything from him, and he never even knew. If this story made you feel something, that's exactly what it should do. History is never just about armies and tactics. It is about men who make choices under unbearable pressure, and the people who pay the price for those choices. Subscribe, because the next chapter of this story, what Alexander's conquest eventually did to him, is just as devastating.